we had already had a policy in this country called deinstitutionalization, the idea of moving people who are mentally ill out of the back wards of mental institutions and moving them into the community. Why? Because we all saw those horrific documentaries that were made by Frederick Wiseman and others, Titicut Follies and other of those views. We saw the horrific and inhumane and fetid conditions that people were living in the back wards of hospitals. And John Kennedy, when he was president, signed an executive order that those people, we should create policies that move people out of those horrific conditions and into a place in the community. And we did. All over the country, whether it was Governor Dukakis, a liberal Democrat in Massachusetts, or Ronald Reagan, a conservative Republican in California. The idea was the ideal. It seemed like the best policy. Move people out of those horrific conditions. Find a rooming house, a lodging house, a YMCA room, a YWCA room. Place people with the new medications, the new psychotropic medications that have been developed that would help them normalize in those situations, and provide community services that would support people in taking those meds. So we did all across the country. And I can tell you, I've talked about this all over the world. All over the world, deinstitutionalization happened. And generally what happened was it was a three-legged stool. You needed the place to live, the psychotropic meds, and the community supports. In most places in the world, they provided the place to live, that YMCA or YWCA room. The psychotropic meds, they were loaded with meds when they went out the door of the back wards. But we provided no community services to support people taking those meds. And of course, what we've learned from any pharmaceutical commercial you now see on television, what you learn is that, yes, the pharmaceutical can help you, but in that very low sotto voce voice at the end of the pharmaceutical commercial, they tell you if you take this, your kidneys might stop functioning, any hope of procreation you ever had will be over, and all other kinds of maladies will come. And then they go back to the cheerful drug whose name that you can't pronounce, usually some X's and Z's and L's in it. Well, what people came out of the back wards knew, they knew those side effects of the meds. So while they had the meds when they were placed, now they're in their own place. They've just been medicated. And many of them, and I talked to many people, they knew that why people thought they were crazy was because they were in that back ward with all those other crazy people. And that if they could just get out of there, they would be returned to themselves, their normalcy. And of course, for the first several weeks of their tenancy, they were fine. I don't need those meds. I'm fine. As the meds wore off, unfortunately, those symptoms came back, talking, hearing voices, acting in ways that would threaten their tenancy and did indeed interrupt their tenancy. Many of them lost their tenancies. When they fell, those back wards had been closed. So when they fell to the street. And that's where you get in the late 70s and early 80s, really the beginning of, I would say, modern homelessness. It was the result of a well-intended policy that led to unintended consequences, which is a paradigm all too frequent in our care for the poorest, and certainly all too frequent in homelessness. The well-intentioned efforts that lead to the unintended consequences for the lives of those people. So in all of that, the notion was that housing first needed to have not only the housing, but the services to support those tenancies. And when you combine housing and services, you've got something that works for homeless people. And I'll say one quick note on that. The most important initiative that's ever been done out of the federal government is an initiative targeted to homeless veterans. It's called HUD-VASH, which means that HUD provides a housing voucher so you can get access and it will pay your rent. And the VA, the Veterans affairs provides the services to support. So you have housing and services together. That's what works. It was actually an initiative that was developed by Jack Kemp when he was the HUD secretary way back in the early 1990s. It went dormant. We resuscitated it under President Bush. It continues now to be homelessness policy, and it's had a direct impact on homeless veterans. Literally, you can look at the numbers. Whenever there's a robust investment in HUD-VASH, which would be about 10,000 housing vouchers in a year, the numbers of homeless veterans drops dramatically. When it's a tepid response of 4,000 or 5,000, the drop isn't quite so great. So we know there's a direct correlation, causative correlation of offering housing with services that reduces a population of homeless people. So in the last 20 years or so, we've been able to reduce the number of homeless veterans by half by employing the strategy of housing with services.